Hello.
Good morning. You are live on YouTube.
I know. I need to tell. Hello. I just need to put the link in the thing. Oh God. Oh, can you hear the thing?
No,
Oh, I can hear it on YouTube. All right. There's only one person. Can you hear the thing?
no.
Oh, I can hear it on YouTube. Okay.
All
Let
right,
me
there's only
give
one person.
you. Right. I've sent you now the link to the YouTube thing. I'm getting the reverb, or like the delayed recording. It's quite awful. So I'm going to stop it, stop listening to it. And there's only one person. Well, it was currently. So, so the people in Edinburgh, um, they, you said mute the YouTube. I just removed it. The people in Edinburgh, they said they can't access Zoom. So he was supposed to be getting his colleagues to go anyway. Let's see what happens. But I just set it up. So there's a delay. I don't know how people ask questions on YouTube. No idea. And now I don't know because I've just deleted it. Um, but what was going to happen at, I've muted it now, that's clever. So what is going to happen is at 10, if I mute, then you can't hear me. Oh, it's fine. There's only one person if they join at all. So what I'm going to do like a little icebreaker. So and there's supposed to be 95 people coming. Obviously there won't be because it's a free event. So that's quite a lot of people. So I'm going to ask people like a little question. So that means the chat's going to be really full. So then if people ask questions later on, I'm going to need them to be able, I'm going to need you to be able to find the questions. So if you can, so if I think hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. Um, if you can just pull out the questions so I don't have to scroll through the chat.
Mhm.
So is that all right then? So about 20 past. And if you could give
Mhm.
me I mean, I'll be watching the time anyway, so it should be fine. It all should be fine. But if what I don't want is anyone coming off chat and asking questions while I'm going through it, because that is very distracting. So I just want to go through, and I'll make that clear that we'll have time for questions at the end. People can pop things in the chat, um, and that there more likely to be some like discussions going and people being like, "Oh, then so the idea of this is I'm doing it to try and get some work in January, but I've got to be really helpful in the first instance and share with them lots of insights. So yeah, let's see how it goes. I need to try and make it not too salesy, but I'm just sharing insights from workshops like, oh, these are some of the things that your colleagues, other council people have shared. So yeah, let's see how it goes. Um, what else do I have to say about it? Um, the recordings, the people will get the recordings and the slide as a follow on. So if anyone asks that in the chat who joins late, you just like type that kind of thing in. So if people join late, just pop things in the chat like slides and recording will be sent tomorrow to be sent as a follow up. Um, and maybe I will give you this link. So also what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask people to um to DM me if they're interested in any of the things that I offer. So I'm going to give you the this is the link for the discovery call, so you can always put this in the chat.
Okay,
You can
so
put it
book in.
so just right at the end, if anyone's they will get these links, but just if anyone's super keen. Um, yeah. So let's see how we go.
So if anybody would like to book time in.
So we've got two people in the waiting room now. Keynotes. I'm not going to open it till 10:30. So I might just close down everything on my computer now and get all that tidied up so that we are ready to go. Get my water bottle ready. Yeah. So this is very weird seeing myself on YouTube.
In delay.
Exactly. That's the best bit, in delay.
I'm just going to make sure I can. Is it closed on me? YouTube. On YouTube, I see a chat box on the right-hand side, so I will monitor that.
Yeah.
And I will drop
So,
stuff in as relevant.
yeah. So if
And I
you
will
say
surface any
yeah,
questions to you that are happening whilst you're talking in this one.
yeah.
Also.
So I won't look at the chat. So just so you know, I won't look at the chat while I'm doing this. I'm just going to do my presentation. I'm going to look at it at the end. So if anything awful happens, then you can come off mute and tell me. But apart from that, I don't want to know because it's just too disruptive.
Do you want to make me co-host so I can kick people out?
Yeah.
Has it ever happened to you? It's never happened in any of the meetings I've been in.
No, not since the pandemic. All those things don't really happen. But oh, where am I? But you could, but also if you're co-hosting, you can let people in as well.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. We'll do it in about 3 minutes because I'm quite keen to start on time. But I mean, out of 95 people, if only two join that, I mean, now basically people just join on the hour. That's what happens these days, which is fine. It's what I do. But if you keep,
Do you want to give people the rights to unmute themselves? I would take that off.
no. Well,
Take
yeah,
that
no,
off.
they will at the end, and it depends. It depends on if let people ask questions verbally. Depends on how many people are here. Probably not, but hopefully when they all join, they all should be muted. Did you join muted?
No. Yes. And video off.
Just, I do. I mean, I do webinars all the time. I don't know. Well, I'm slightly nervous about this because I feel like it's like a sales one. I think I just have to think I'm coming from a place of authenticity and I'm very helpful.
I think that's the way that it works. If you're sharing something that's valuable,
Yeah,
and that everybody leave this with something good, and that it gives people a taste of something more.
exactly. Okay, let's start letting people in.
I'll go on mute. Have a great session.
Thank you. Thank you. Are you happy just to do the inviting people, letting people in, and then it's on you, and then I. Oh, God, I've got more things to open. Good morning, everybody. So as you're arriving in, I will. Oh, let's see. We can just. As you're all arriving in, let's get started. Let's see who's in the room, who's here today. And if you'd like to pop your name in the chat, maybe which local authority you're from, and one of these questions. So you only have to answer one. So which behaviour have you found hardest to change? Which the behaviour that you have changed? Or which behaviour you would like to change with your work? So let's get us in the mood for what we're going to talk about today, which is behaviour change. So just pop your answer in the chat. And so as everyone's rolling in now, I'll say this a couple of times and then we can get started. So just to get us in the mood for the topic of today, think about a behavior that you are maybe you've done, you'd like to do, or something you're thinking about for your work. Just pop in the chat your name, your local authority, and either the behavior you want to change, you have changed, or when you're looking to change. So we've got people streaming in now, streaming in. So I'll wait a couple of minutes more. So I'll do this for another 2 minutes and then we will get started. So it'd be great to know who's in the room today. And let's open up the chat so I can have a look. So people are looking to improve or address food waste, recycling, behaviours, communal recycling. And what about anyone willing to share any of their personal behaviours that they're struggling to change, or ones they would like to change? Anyone going to be honest and say, I'm struggling to change eating meat or traveling to work by car, something like that. Quite often when I do this in my workshops, we get all the honesty coming out. It's like going to church, sharing people's truths. So being more active, yeah. Thank you for people coming in and being honest about things they'd like to change. So welcome everyone as you're streaming in. Just to get us in the mood for behaviour change. It's going to be the focus for today. Let me know who you are, and then which of these might. So, what behaviour did you find hard to change? Maybe in your personal life. What behaviour have you successfully changed, and the behaviour that you would most like to change with your work? And I'm going to now get going with the slides. So let's start from the beginning, because that's always a good place to start. And I will get things recording. Great. So welcome today, everybody. Welcome to this session on an introduction to behaviour change for local authorities. So in this hour, we are going to have a little introduction and icebreaker. We are going to think about some basics for behaviour change and audience segmentation. We'll look at some barriers and motivations. So thinking about cognitive influences, infrastructure influences, and social influences, and then how these apply to communications. And then I'll share some further support and resources. So throughout this, I'm going to also share insights from council colleagues who have attended my workshops and things they've got out of these kind of processes that I'm going to share with you in these frameworks and tools. What I'm also going to do is use examples from waste, nature, retrofitting, energy, and travel. And when you filled in the application to join this, the thing that came out most that people were interested in was waste. So there is a slightly more sort of waste focus, but I've got a lot of examples from all areas, and this is really just sort of a taster to get you thinking about a few things. So the principles you can apply to every impact area that you're looking to address. And just to say, the recording and slides will be shared as a follow-up, so you will have these to look back at. So for those who haven't already done this, just to get us in the mood, think about behaviour that you are looking to change. So maybe one personal behaviour that you've struggled to change, maybe one that you have successfully changed, or a behaviour that you'd like to address with your work. And just pop those in the chat, so we're really in the flavour of behaviour change. And I will say, I do this in all my workshops, and the number one behaviour that everyone generally struggles with is travel, and loads of traveling by bike or cycling, or the same thing, or walking. So it's quite interesting, because often local authorities are working on travel behaviours and encouraging people, and then we get lots of insights from staff about the reasons that they find it difficult, which we can learn from. So thanks for those. And I will review those kind of afterwards, but hopefully you can also see what everyone else's challenges are in your sphere of work. Sarah Warding, yeah, good luck with that one. We will hopefully have some insights that you can apply to this. So who am I to be talking to you about behaviour change? So hello, my name's Olivia Drake, for those who don't know me. And I had my behavioural insights aha moment when I first started working with Shambhala Festival. I've been working in events, and I was like, I need to do something for Mother Nature. This industry is so wasteful. And so I left events and retrained in sustainable event management. And when I started working with Shambhala, which is one of the greenest festivals in the UK, we brought in a behavioural consultant to help with some waste initiatives. And what she started sharing about behavioural economics was like, oh my God, wow, this is why Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth haven't had the cut through that we all would hope for. And this is why people aren't doing the things that I'm prepared to do. And it was really enlightening for me. And I was working on other campaigns with other organisations around plastics, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And I was like, more people need to know about this. We need to be applying this in more spaces. So I went to UWE and did their sustainable development modules around behaviour change. And I've done a lot of online courses, read a lot of research, and have been applying it to all of my work ever since. And that was back in 2015. So how I use behaviour change. So in campaigns, so I work with the City to Sea team and was part of the team that launched the Refill campaign, which many of you will be refill towns, and you might be running the refill kind of campaign yourselves. So with communications, so when we worked on the reusable cup scheme with City to Sea, we used, I prepared the communication, so all of the impact points and all the initiatives that they could do and how they could frame the messaging using things like social norms and social proof. So it's really powerful when we think about how do we use language in a way that will engage people. And research. So I use a lot of behaviour change research, lots of papers, and I've also been doing research with Fife Council on adopting food bins in food caddies in high-rise flats. And I'll share some more about that in a moment. And then finally, I do a lot of training. So this year I've worked with Bristol Waste, Cambridge and Peterborough Recap Group, West Midlands Combined Authority and the West of England Mayoral Combined Authority, and have been delivering behaviour change workshops to their teams. So I will share some of that in my the insights from those as we go through, so you can see what aha moments people like yourselves have had from this work and these kinds of approaches to change. So starting back at the beginning of behaviour change. So, and also just to say, this is just, like a flavour of the things to cover off. And normally I would do sort of my trainings around sort of the theory to behaviour change are about an hour and a half where we go delve into the background. So this is just a bit of a flavour. So what behaviour change is not? Education about the problem. This is known as the information deficit model, which is if we just tell people, then they'll change their behaviours. We just need to inform them. We need to raise awareness. But the value action gap tells us that education and awareness raising don't lead to action. And there's plenty of people we know, and maybe plenty of us, who know the environmental impacts of our actions, yet we still do them because there's other drivers and maybe barriers for us to change. So actually what behaviour change is about overcoming barriers. And so we need to be able to remove those barriers and increase the motivation for taking action. But every behaviour is different. And in different contexts, it has different barriers and motivations. So we can't talk about, oh, just adopt low carbon travel. Low carbon travel isn't a behaviour. Driving to work is a behaviour. Cycling to the shops is a behaviour. And they're different in different contexts because cycling to work has different barriers and motivations to cycling to the gym on a Saturday morning. And this is probably the hardest thing that I'm going to tell you, and maybe some of you know this, but everyone is not your audience. Yes, everyone in your region are your audience, but you can't talk to them in the same way because they'll have different barriers and motivations to the behaviours. So when we get started with our campaigns, we have to, number one, segment our audience. And it's very helpful to use persona maps or, and I'll show you some of those as a way to get clear on what are the differences with those different audiences. We want to get very specific on that behaviour. So are we talking about people travelling to work? And are we talking about a mum travelling to work? Then we want to do the research on those barriers and motivations. Then we start to develop the campaign, and then we test and iterate. So let's think about our audience and understanding them better. So researching behaviours can involve stakeholder interviews, very helpful. Literature reviews, so I'll be sharing literature today. Observations of people, so just seeing what people do. Surveys, although you can't trust what people say, and then structured discussions. So in the work that I've been doing with Fife Council on adopting food waste collections in high-rise flats, we also work with Metro Store, who helped with the design of the bins, and their bins that we use for the trial. So in the 12th floor high-rise flats, it was mainly an older demographic. And what we learned from the interviews I conducted, so I went into people's homes and chatted to people, was that one of the main reasons that they were adopting this service was because the bin was right outside the front door. People were motivated around changing the smells in their shoots and in the communal areas. So they hoped that if everyone did it, it would smell less. And the caretaker was an advocate of this and has said that his bin smells significantly less, his bin store, since the scheme has been rolled out. The barriers for people were the food waste bags and the concern of carrying those flimsy bags, down the stairs. And that was a concern. When we talked about what do people remember, it was mainly not the letters or the leaflets, but what went in the bin. And that's because we put it on the top of the bin lid and it was on the sides of the bin outside. And when we shared, so we put posters up in the building, and note to everybody, don't put them with lots of other posters because people won't see them. So we ended up putting them on the doors so they got seen. People were really surprised about how much was being collected. And actually they were like, oh yeah, more people are doing this. And the caretakers have really felt the benefit. So they're actually helping with doorstep collections because they see the benefit to them and to their residents. So we can make very incorrect assumptions from research and from not doing research. And the government made a mistake where they'd asked SMEs about adopting energy efficient measures. And what they surmised from the research was that people didn't know about energy efficiency. So they thought they needed to do an education campaign. But the reality was people weren't motivated by low financial savings. And so Flux were brought in to do some more work around this. And they actually uncovered 5 broad motivations that drive business owners and office managers. And this was business growth, self-fulfillment, their people, ethics, and money. And one of the examples they found was a chef and an event manager had a space, and inside it, the kitchen staff were uncomfortably hot and the customers were uncomfortably cold. And so they recommended a ventilation system to address this. And he was really keen to do this because it benefited his people. And as a consequence, it was more energy efficient and he saved money. So getting to the heart of what actually motivates people is important. So how do you segment all of the people in your boroughs, in your areas? Well, you can use persona mapping that is specific to the behaviour you're looking at. So this example here is one from the Department for Transport, and it segments different types of car owners or aspirational car owners. You could use things like OAC data. So this gives data from different types of residents. And this is what Resource Futures uses when they do their waste mapping. And it will tell you whether someone's a rural resident or a multicultural metropolitan. And they've got characteristics with each of these. So this is very demographic. There's also the Britain Talks climate segmentation tools. And these kind of segment people in terms of values and interests and what's important to them. And it doesn't actually ask people about climate, but behind it, they will tell you, how do you talk to these different segments? And it's really interesting because with a backbone conservative, you do not want to be using an environmentalist or a campaigner as a messenger. You want to have someone like them from the countryside. And with this data, Bristol uses it, and they did some work with the Centre for Sustainable Energy. And what they found is that the progressive activists, which are your more environmentally and ethically motivated people, they're actually all in the centre. And then you've got your backbone conservatives out in the perimeter, in the rural areas, which is expected. But this actually shows that you could actually do demographically segmented campaigns. And it tells you how those people think differently. And maybe it is that, and I was a Bristol resident living in the centre, and it was great because I could cycle anywhere and I didn't have a car. So, different people will have different lifestyle arrangements as well. So you can communicate based on those. So I wonder whether anyone else is using the Britain Talks climate segmentation. And then you can then use this to build your persona mapping. And so the Britain Talks Climate has lots of things about people's values, what type of person they are, who the trusted messengers are, what media channels they use, what their worries and fears are, and their position on environmental issues, which are all the things that you can put into a map to help people in a persona map to really get into the thinking of your target audience. So when I've used these tools in workshops, the things that people have said is that they really want to conduct research across their regions to better understand their people. That if they're working within a combined authority, doing that mapping would be really helpful so they can share insights from those different types of audiences. So what they learn in one local authority could be applied to another. And identifying who those key target audiences are is really helpful. So Bristol actually chooses to talk to 2 or 3 of those Britain Talks climate personas because they realise the other ones are much harder to reach. And from one of the other research workshops, someone said it's very easy to come from our own biases and our own ways of thinking. So actually, if we can use this research to build our campaigns, then we're going to be talking in a different way, not from our own way of seeing things. So that's a bit about audiences. I'm now going to move on to these. What is the barriers and what are the motivations for behavior change? And as I mentioned, there's 3 areas we'll look at. So we're going to start off with the brain and our individual cognitive influences. So thinking with our human brain is actually very energy intensive. And I like to so Daniel Kahneman called this our system 2 brain. It's very slow, deliberate, and logical. And I kind of like to think of it like a gas guzzling tractor. So going along very slowly. And this is because when we're thinking with our human brain, it uses a lot of energy to make decisions, to process complexity. And thinking about recycling, in an interesting paper called If It's Not Made Easy, I Won't Bother, somebody actually said, well, apparently they said this. I mean, I think this sounds to me like kind of researcher speak, but I have to infer if I have to check locally for recycling information, because it doesn't actually say when I have individual resources depleted, like I am tired or things are not going well for me, if it's not made easy for me, I will just not bother. So I think the bit we can take from that is if it's not made easy, I won't bother. And this is a problem for things like plastics recycling because it's confusing. So most people actually relied on what they think as common sense. So those mental shortcuts that people make. And the few that did look for more information were left even more confused by the conflicting messages that they found on the food packaging, on the signage in communal areas. So these are other challenges that we have around recycling. And obviously, some of these things are outside of our control because packaging we can't control. So how does the brain save energy? Well, it uses habits, so repeated actions, so we don't need to think. It uses memories and context. So what happened the last time I travelled to work? And research found a correlation between low experience and negative attitudes towards public transportation. So if people don't have a memory for it, they'll stick with their existing habits. We use emotions to make decisions. So what's going to make me feel good right now? Getting out on the bike in the cold? And for recycling, the yuck factor from food waste recycling, rinsing cans. And then there's the shortcuts and the easy option. So we tend to choose the path of least resistance. And we like rewards. So a feel-good option. And is there, where are those benefits to recycling? And I just like to say, if I don't cover this today, financial rewards are not the rewards you need to be considering. Social rewards, social acknowledgement, saying thank you, that's the way forward. Don't go down the route of money, because once the money stops, so does the behavior. So how do we address these cognitive shortcuts? We use icons for mental shortcuts, which means because our brain processes visual images 60,000 times faster than text. And these are some of my good examples of good bin signage. Salient bins, so we get people's attention. So because people are going along in their lives, doing their own things, we need to snap them out of it. So with the bins in Fife, working with Metro Store, we put all these bright colours on them. Bristol Waste did the stickers for the food caddies, and this is something called anthropomorphism, and it's very effective in engaging people. And then Bristol Waste has got the colourful bins. And in Bournemouth, when they did some work with Hubbub, and we were working with them for City to Sea, they just put vinyl wrap on the bins. And where these bins were, there was less littering. Where the plain black bins were, there was more littering. So just making your bins more colourful can engage people. Effort versus benefit. So our brains see a lot of effort in doing things, and it's mainly in our head. So cycling versus driving. Our decision to do behaviours are often based on the benefit to us. So what's in it for me? And if there's no perceived benefit, we're less likely to take action. And we can think we need to talk about cost-saving benefits, but those aren't what often drive people. Quite often it's comfort, convenience, and cleanliness. And these are some principles from a theory called social practice theory. So for those in the room thinking about retrofitting, bad news. People perceive retrofitting as complicated, expensive, long-term, disruptive, but environmentally friendly. What they want is simple, cheap, easy to use measures that they can do themselves. So this is the things we need to think about. How do we reframe it to appeal to those things? And how do we surface and address those perceived barriers? So we also experience pain and friction. So humans hate the unknown and uncertainty. And when in doubt, we stay with the known and the status quo. So something called status quo bias is where we prefer what we already know. With close the door campaigns, if you're thinking about energy reduction for businesses, people were scared that they'd lose customers, that they'd break disability rules. And North Somerset also found, when they're talking about energy, that SMEs often undervalue decarbonisation measures because they're hard to quantify. And they're reluctant in disrupting or changing the accepted practices within their businesses. So how do we address that? We give something, we let people have a trial. And trials are really powerful because they overcome people's expectations and their concerns. So an electric bike trial for a business found that people's perceptions of road safety and barriers of weather and road condition were diminished. Did they get better? No, it's England. A 3-week car trial by Possible found that 4 out of 10 people who did it reduced their car ownership, and 3 bought new bikes. A trial of overland train travel increased people's likelihood of using train travel internationally. So the more we can get people to give things a go, the better. And this is because what we have to do is overcome the barriers. So when we're thinking about the cognitive, we need to think that our target audience have low motivation, low patience, hate doing anything, and are trying to complete a task as quickly as possible. So what Dan Ariely says is that, in other words, we need to design the path of least resistance. So how do we do that? So there is something we need to consider, which is the infrastructure. And the infrastructure is a really key area which you have a lot of influence over in certain circumstances as councils. So you are choice architects, and a choice architect is able to change the choice architecture. And the choice architecture describes how the decisions we make are affected by the layout, the sequencing, the range of choices that are available to people. And people will choose the easiest option or the most familiar to them. Remember status quo bias, or often the default. So what is the most easiest thing? Like if the car is outside the house, it's the easy option, it's the default. And this can also work negatively. And I was listening to something from Communicate yesterday, the communications conference. Oh, and what they found was that looking at green spaces and rural spaces, that they were biased towards white communities and habits because the cafes, information centre, and the activities in them were open, say, 10 till 4, when actually the Black and minority ethnic groups were coming after those times, and they had no access to any of these services because they weren't set up for their habits and their routines. So how do we change the infrastructure? So in the Waste It's Mine, It's Yours project, which is very interesting around communal waste, and the Re-London project, also around waste in flats, the things that they made changes to were co-locating bins, reducing the aperture size on recycling and compost bins, providing compost caddies, compost bins, and internal storage for residents of flatted houses, buildings, improving bin storage areas and cleaning them up, improving accessibility for people with physical challenges, setting up the collection of additional materials, including food waste, small WEEE, textiles, and better areas for reuse. Batteries and items for reuse. So really making the choice architecture easy for people to do the right thing. So what is often also tied up with infrastructure is meanings. And social practice theory says that the objects, tools, and infrastructure affect our competencies, so our skills and our knowledge, and the cultural meanings that are attached to them. So if we think about particular skills or habits, with driving a car, we can also go shopping. We can take the kids to school. We can do all of these things with one item. And we're not choosing that to disrupt the environment or to be polluting. We're doing it because it enables all these other skills and abilities. So what are the meanings tied up with transport? Well, if we think about a Tesla, it has a particular identity. You won't see this you're less likely to see the CEO of a company sat at the bus stop, coming to work, because there's a certain meaning attached with public transport, maybe less so in London, but more so in more rural places. And what are the perceptions of jumping on a scooter? Who do people think it's for? Is it for your retired grampy? Probably not. So we need to be aware of these meanings. And when we're thinking about urban spaces, we also need to be aware of this. So Groundwork and lots of others have done research, and they found that local parks are perceived as unsafe male spaces by young women. Rural areas as dominated by white people and places of racism and harassment. And a study found that people from Asian and African ethnic backgrounds were less likely to be attracted to the wilderness of a green space than white participants. So where we might see like, oh, look at this lovely wild space, someone else might see it as something completely different. So finally, let's think about the social norms and the social influences on behaviours. So social norms are the rules that prescribe what people should and shouldn't do given their social surroundings. And we have injunctive norms, which is what society in general approves or disapproves of. So the fact we don't go and kill our neighbours, and generally we don't litter. Descriptive norms are what others around us do in certain settings. And research in South Gloss found that cycling in some contexts was deemed socially unacceptable. So turning up to a 50th birthday party on a bicycle was deemed socially unacceptable. In Ealing, they found that incoming communities saw cycling as a backward step. So actually, they didn't want to ride bicycles. And when we're thinking about nature or gardening, there's these keeping up with the Joneses practices, like keeping your lawn short, keeping your beds nice and tidy. Weeds, that's not a Victorian, the Victorian ideal, and our perceptions of the green and pleasant land of England. Well, actually that's, people think it's very green and full of nature, but England's one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. So our perceptions of what's the right thing or what's good for nature are informed by what we see and what we perceive to be the right thing. And when in doubt, people will look for other people like them to inform their behaviours. So Ealing Council understood this in terms of trying to get people on bikes. So to address these taboos around cycling being a backward step, they gave people, I think, about 2,500 reconditioned bikes. So they gave them out to the communities so that people would see other people like them riding bikes. So changing that perception. And who communicates with people matters. And I'm going to say that often councils aren't the right people to communicate. And I'll show you why shortly. But you might not be the trusted messenger that people will listen to. So we need to think, who is that trusted messenger that you could be working with to get these messages out there and to help trust people? So it could be friends and family. It could be community leaders. It can be an expert in certain circumstances. In America, the Changing Ice film was screened in Ohio, and they worked with faith leaders to organize screenings and use language that climate skeptic audiences identified with. They also had at the end, I think the preacher did a prayer for, I think it was Donald Trump at the time, and for people to change their views. So this is something, it is using those kind of messengers is much more relevant than an environmental expert who comes talking in the terminology or in the way that just doesn't engage, people. So the Carbon Co-op encouraged their members to invite their friends and neighbours round to see and feel firsthand the outcomes of an energy efficient retrofit. So that idea of the trial, let people experience it. And it's much more trusted if your neighbour says, oh, I really love my house. Now I've got all this insulation and my heat source air pump. It's going to be much more powerful than someone from the council saying you should have an air source heat pump. It's good for the environment. So the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board did more research to advise on how to engage farmers. And what they said was that people need to invest in trained facilitators in order to increase the amount of face-to-face knowledge exchange, because that's how farmers work. Involve multiple actors in knowledge exchange, so friends and family. And find ways of communicating with farmers in existing formal or informal networks. And recruiting peer champions, sharing testimonials from actual farmers, which are much more trusted. So this is the Edelman's Trust Barometer. I think this is from a couple of years ago now. But if we can see at the top, scientists are trusted just one stop more than my co-workers. And if we scroll down to 62%, that's people in my community. So they are trusted just a little bit less than the national health authorities. If we go right down to the bottom, government leaders are down there. So where can you engage people who are trusted messengers. And thinking about all of those kind of concepts, what came up from the workshops is the importance of social influences to engage people and to drive change. So really kind of the people who've attended the workshops are thinking, how can we communicate what other people are doing already? And using social recognition as an incentive with the knowledge that once monetary discounts end, a behaviour may also stop. So I was sharing insights around bus passes. So maybe you give out free bus passes. Well, quite often when the bus pass stops, so does the behaviour. So how can you use social recognition, thanking people, congratulating them to actually keep behaviours going? So that's talking about the barriers and the motivations. So what about developing solutions? So there's a number of different models, and I'm not going to go into these in detail, but COM-B is one that is great for considering your strategy because it starts from the inside out. So you look at the human's behavior first of all, so what the barriers and motivators, then you think about the interventions, and then you think about your strategy, and it gives you all these charts to do that. And I've done these sessions. I did one with Cambridge and Peterborough on their strategy using COM-B. The East model is one of particular favourites because it's really easy to remember. Easy, attractive, social and timely. So how do we make our initiatives, all of these? How do we make them easy by removing the barriers? How do we get those attractive by talking in the way that our audience relates to? How do we make it social with all that social norming and examples? And how do we make it timely by communicating at that moment that they need to think about it? So prompts on a bin when people are about to put their food waste in the general waste. And the East framework is what I use a lot, and that's come up as really something that actually people would use. So they'd actually share it with their in their communications, like, oh, how could you make these behaviours easy, attractive, social and timely? And we've used these models to do co-creation sessions, and people have found that actually doing that, especially across combined authorities, has been really helpful to come up with ideas and bounce ideas off in the room. So if you've got those opportunities to come together, especially with the marketing team, the environment team, and really pull those insights, great things can happen. So finally, how do we adopt these principles into our communications? Well, another model that I really like is the campaigns that work model. And what we want to focus on is 1, 2, 6. So these are the things that we think about when we're creating our campaign. And it's about using good norms. So these social norms again, being really specific about their action, catalyzing commitment. So how can we get people to commit to doing something? How do we tap into positive emotions? So not this doomism and this negativity. They say it's pride, love, hope, and optimism. Those are the things that keep people going. And showing it matters. So showing people's behaviors will make a difference. And just as a word of warning, avoid in the watch outs fear, altruism, so that like, oh, just do it for the good of the planet. Incentives, and then the definitely big no-nos, reinforcing bad norms, so I'll talk about that in a minute, using guilt and stopping at awareness. And the other one, finally, allowing distance. So when we talk about allowing distance, it's talking about polar bears or the ice caps melting. Like that's no good. We need to be talking about what's happening for your community. So an example of using positive descriptive norms. So saying 9 out of 10 people use a bin, reduce littering. It's focusing on the desired behaviour. Describing what people need to do also reduces littering. So be a hero, recycle. Litter-free Dorset had these "thank you for taking your rubbish home, love your verge" messages. And they went from 84 to 7 litter complaints from spring to summer. And we adopted this with the Ravenscraig bins for Fife Council. So we said, thanks, Ravenscraig, put your rubbish, food waste in here. So we're telling people what they need to do. It can go horribly wrong if you do the reinforcing the bad social norms. And these ones increase littering. So 1 out of 10 people litter, increased littering in Lewin, Cornwall. In the campaigns that were running in Bournemouth after the beginning of the pandemic, so the local councillors were like, we need a hard-hitting campaign. And so they had this campaign which used the word shit a lot. And what was found was, so Hubbub had drones, and what they found is where these signs were, there was more littering. Where their bright coloured bins were that said use the bin, less littering. So don't go for hard-hitting messages with litter in them. And we need to do feedback loops in your communication. So saying thank you to people, showing that other people are doing the behaviour. So in Valencia, they have these counters of how many people have cycled past. Bath and North East Somerset, with their Close the Door campaign, said thank you in the magazines, in the newspapers. And there's resident text messaging systems that you could use to do this. And I'll talk about that in a minute. We also want to tell stories about other people in your local area doing these behaviours, because that is that social proof. It's the case studies, it's the relatable messengers. And the hero's journey is a great tool to use for this. And I did this with the West of England Mayoral Authority, and it was the best part of the session. Everyone had such a great time. When people shared their stories, it was just really, really inspiring. So from these kind of communications, which I do a lot around communications in the workshops, people love the campaigns that work wheel as a checklist and a reference point. So you've made your campaign and you just check it over. Like, have we done this? Have we not done this? Sharing case studies and learnings, something that people can do more of. And Bristol has a good climate hub, which has lots of videos, which are great stories. And then using trust in messages and positive social norming and the hero's journey to develop campaigns and communications. So these are things that already exist that you can tap into and to use. So we're going to go to questions in a moment. And just before that, I will share some further support and resources. And so just to let you know that, as I've talked a little bit about, I do training workshops, and they've come all in one go. So we look at theory, understanding audiences, developing initiatives, and I run sessions online every few months on these. I do bespoke online sessions for teams, and I do live face-to-face workshops, and I've got 4 slots for January to March. And these could be for developing your strategy. It could be about your campaigns and your communications. And in a day, we can look at 4 or 5 different impact areas, because we'll have different tables working on different things and different audiences. So you come away from it with loads of ideas that you can then take forward. Some bad, some good. And then you can then take those forward. But you've got a whole room of people's ideas, different influences, different ways of thinking. So you haven't just got that kind of very siloed way of approaching things. And what I also run for sustainability professionals is monthly sessions. So it's a 6-month program, and we do waste, energy, travel, nature, communications, and food. And if people are interested, I can run that for local authorities. So if that's something that you're interested in, just type your name in the chat, maybe DM me personally, and just let me know. And if you're also interested in an online training, then also let me know. So other things I'm involved with are relevant to yourselves. I'm joining on Monday the Suez team for a chat around strategies for sustainable consumption. It's going to have a Christmas theme. I'm going to be talking about behaviour change, what we can learn from Christmas as the ultimate behaviour change kind of campaign. And then in February, I will be with the Let's Recycle team and local partnerships for the comms conference. And there they've got two people speaking about the text messaging systems. So that sounds really interesting. I will also be sharing the links here to some of the resources that aren't already in the with the hyperlinks. So the Local Authority Association case studies, loads on behaviour change, really helpful. The Campaigns That Work website, loads of stuff on plastics campaigns and what to do and what not to do. And I am working in the new year on a behaviour change guide. So if you're joined my newsletter, you will get that. And anyone who's joined this will be the first to get a link to that. So that's a lot of content. How's your system 2 brain going? How's your human brain? Is it feeling like it's just been used quite a lot? Let's stop slides and let's open to the floor. So stop screen sharing. So any questions? So Emma, has anything come up in the chat that you would like me to answer? Anyone got anything they want to put in the chat now as a question?
No questions so far, but one of the participants is from Ohio and agreed that tracked.
So yes, wow, we've got someone from Ohio here. That's amazing. So is anyone, I mean, if we don't have any questions, so is there anyone working on any particular campaigns that they would like some insights for? Anyone who's doing anything on waste that you've got like, oh, you can ask me for recommendations. Maybe other people in the room might also have some recommendations from their own experiences. So anyone got anything that they're working on at the moment that they would like some behavioral insights on? Talat, do you want to come off mute and share? Think you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, Livy. Yeah, thanks very much. My name's Talat, and I'm from the Liverpool City region, and I work within a partnership, and it's a fairly new partnership. And we're kind of going back to basics in a lot of ways. But I think one of the things that for us, we would really like to kind of see a big change in, and a lot of it involves behavior change, is with the government's new simpler recycling coming into place. So at the moment, it's trying to currently change where, let's say, across the whole of the UK, we've all seen recycling rates plateau. We've seen contamination go up. And then at the same time, we've got new schemes coming. So it's really, how do we sort of start paving the way towards sort of improving our recycling rates, reducing contamination, but at the same time is preparing for these new changes. And we're kind of really interested as well as finding any authorities that have achieved food waste recycling recently, not years ago, because I've worked with other authorities, but also with restricted residual, and trying to understand how the behaviour change as well. So appreciate there's a lot I've asked here, but I don't know sort of, if you can just pick out some points or anything.
Yeah, so Cardiff, Wales is a good place to look for good inspiration on food waste recycling. And I did a webinar for CIWM with Claire from Cardiff, and she's a good person to talk to because they've got good rates. And so one of the things, thinking about what you're saying, is so we're waiting for the government. We're always waiting for the government. How do you prepare people? So in behavioral psychology, there's something called priming. And what we do when we prime people is we get people ready for the change. So before we expect people to take an action, we expose them to what's expected. So this means that you can start, once you've got some clarity, with talking about those ideal behaviors. So you could use case studies of people who are, doing their recycling right, how people, how people got their head around it, what mental shortcuts they used. So you can start with that before you ask people to take action. You prime them and share them. So it is a bit more of the knowledge, kind of awareness raising, but you use things like case studies and social proof to do it. And you start to also think about what I would also do, and this is what we do in the workshops, we do journey mapping. So you look at, okay, where's the behavior going wrong? What are all the stages up into it? So, and then where are those points that you could intervene or you can communicate. So probably for waste, it all starts at the supermarket. It starts where people are buying those items. It starts when people are going on Amazon. Then, something arrives on their doorstep. Then something else happens. Then they kind of unpackage things, and then they look at their bin and they're confused about where to put it. So if you do that journey map, you might identify places where you can start to seed communications and when you can try and address where the contamination is happening. So hopefully that's helpful. Jane, I think you're up next. Would you like to come off mute and share your question? We can see you. We can't hear you. Sit on mute.
Thank you. Wouldn't let me unmute. Said I wasn't allowed to. Yes. So I work for Groundwork East, and we're working with 4 universities to reduce single use. Well, it's e-waste in general, but specific concentration on the disposable vapes. So we've obviously there's a lot of interest around it, but there isn't as many schemes as to make it easy for disposal. So we're going down the route of maybe encouraging them to use different alternatives, because we don't want to be preachy and say give up. So obviously that is a message we can give out too, but we want to give them alternatives. So yeah, obviously it's a particular audience because they're young people. Is there any advice you could give me around that?
So again, I would exactly. So when I start any kind of behavioural work, and is to do that journey map. So understand what's going on with these students. So where are they buying them? Who are they buying them with? What do they do afterwards? Where are they using them? And then when do they dispose of them? And try and understand more about that to then understand where do you then start to communicate. So how do you communicate, in the shops where they're buying those things? Like, is there something you could do with supermarkets? So Litter Free Dorset worked with local independent shops, and I think spa shops, if they still exist, on banning single-use barbecues. So they actually, kind of worked with those places to stop them selling them. And I guess they sold reusable ones instead, or ones that are less dangerous. But is there anything you can do there? Who are the right messengers? So probably the council, how do they even find your content? So who are the messengers? Are the students who you could get to communicate these messages? How could they talk about the benefits that about not using single-use ones? So what benefits them? And really thinking about where are those points that you could engage with them, and making all of that communications really salient. So what's going to be attractive to a student, and do some testing of messaging. So there's some interesting work that Keep Wales Tidy did around signage for students, and kind of the ones that councils use and what related to them, and talking about things like, oh, it's bad for the local community, or it's bad for the local nature. That didn't matter to the students. So it needed to be relevant to them. So really kind of finding out more about your target audience and addressing it that way. Any other questions come in? Does anyone else put their hand up? I think there is one in here. Is it Emma? Can you just see if there's anything in the chat? I think there was one that I just now lost. It was something about research, evaluation.
There's one from Nick about they're working on an active travel plan. They're keen to understand how to change people's travel behaviour when the car is more convenient, comfortable, quicker, and protected from the weather.
So
And
so what I would say with that, and this is a kind of one that we always look at in workshops, is active travel. So get specific. Don't just think about active travel. Think about cycling, walking, and public transport completely separately. Think about, like you said, the car's more convenient. So when are those moments when people could do it? We tend to go to an all or nothing mentality, and people think you're asking them to give up the car forever. But actually, are you asking them to give it a try just once a week? Give it a try just for going to the gym. Give it a try for the workplace. And think about also, how could you make it increase the friction to the driving? So yeah, it's very convenient to jump in the car, but actually when people arrive at work, if they have to pay for car parking spaces, or if you work with their employers, actually make it less attractive to drive the car. Or could you work with the employers to make it more attractive to have a bike? So again, also think about who are those different target audiences that you've got within your campaign, and where are those opportunities that people are more likely to embrace active travel. Working with families, they've got a lot more, it's a lot harder for them to probably change every day of the week, whereas somebody who's maybe single moving to a bicycle, they haven't got entourage with them, might be much easier. So look at those different kind of those transport personas, think about who are those ones that you want to work with, and think about how do you increase the friction to car driving, and how do you reduce the friction to active travel, and how can you ask people to give it a go? So what can you do to encourage trials? So I'm sure you have access to free bikes for people to have a go on. Those kinds of things really are the way that people will overcome those perceived barriers and thinking it's not all or nothing. Anything else?
The question around evaluation was from Jennifer Casserly. Where does behavioural science informed evaluation come into this? How can local authorities measure the efficacy?
Yes, so one of the things in terms of behavioural science, so what you need to do is have a baseline. So you need to know what happened before to then see whether your initiative has worked. And then ideally you want to be doing one kind of behavioural kind of thing, initiative at once, because if you do lots, you're not going to know, was it the social norms, was it the barriers or the friction, which one is it? But the most important thing is you've got a baseline. Ideally you've got you do little tests and pilots to see what works and what doesn't. But the main thing is to have which might not be practical, but if you know what's gone before, then you can see whether there's a difference. And with it, it's having people that you can talk to. So making sure that you've got some research participants to understand what is it that worked. It's really interesting with the Fife campaign. I was speaking to somebody yesterday about the research, and like, and they said, I couldn't read the letter that you sent, it was illegible. And I was like, well, it's on my computer, it's Arial 11. And then I got the letter that was printed out by the council, and it's some very weird font and it's all faded. And it's that kind of stuff. So being able to talk to residents, which actually gives you the insights of where your campaign might have fallen down. And I also learned that where we were having the posters put up, no one saw them. So it was not even enough, putting the posters up wasn't enough. So what I would say for any research is having people that you can talk to who are participating to see what is working and what isn't. So we are now at time. Was there any questions on YouTube, Emma?
No.
Okay, great. So I will kidge everything up and send over to you as a follow-on, and if hopefully see some of you next week at the Suez event on sustainable consumption and Christmas, and have a good rest of the month. And then for anyone who is interested in workshops, If you've said in the chat you're interested in workshops, let me know. If you're interested in the monthly mentoring, that's great. I will be in touch about that also. Thanks, everyone.